Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate 1 year after the whole world converged on Paris for that, Paris and other major French cities, for that Je suis Charlie march that followed the first Paris terror attack. So much has changed. We're talking about in the company of French Senator Nathalie Goulet, who chairs the Upper Chamber's Commission on Jihadist Network. We're also in the company of sociologist Eric Fassin, his latest book, The Left, The Future of a Disillusion. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Scott Sayar, who wrote the cover story for Harper's Magazine, The Ultimate Terrorist Factory, about those who allegedly inspired those attacks. And Yasser Louati of the Collective Against Islamophobia, who is with us. Before the break, we were talking about some of the measures that the government hasn't taken. Let's talk about one of the ones that they have taken, which is they're pressing for more French-born imams. And we talked about it last week when there were the commemorations of those attacks. Too many foreign-born imams who are out of touch or perhaps manipulated by people from other countries.
Actually, before talking about imams and making this a Muslim or Islamic issue or a Muslim community-specific issue, let's talk about our schools in France. We have over 130,000 kids who leave our schooling system with no degrees, no skills whatsoever. What do we do with them? We mean, like at the heart of our Vivre Ensemble in France, we need to have a strong Republican school. And yet the OCDE states clearly that the French schooling system is among the most unequal ones in the whole OECD region. Then we have to deal with an unemployment. We are back to the 1997 levels. That's how our unemployment has been spiking since François Hollande took office. What do we do with that? Then we also have our housing policies. We keep confining people away from the city, away from business places, away from everybody, and telling them, stay over there, don't come here. And then we also have to review our foreign policies. Let's for example, take the press release by Daesh. What did they say? They say we are doing that for what you're doing in Syria. So, of course, I'm not saying that they were right to do it. I'm just saying that our foreign policy is also part of the problem. How come France has become an enemy? But coming back to the imam issues, so of course, Muslims have to get their hands on their religious affairs, and for the government to start, for once, respecting laicité. Laicité means non-interference with religious affairs. Yet we still see mayors, we still see prefects actually having their hands in the management of mosques. For example, we have a mosque in the suburbs of Lyon. The prefect told the managers of the mosque, I am shutting down the mosque until you guys resign and appoint a new board. Other examples abound.
Yeah, but why did they do that?
Because they can.
No, why did they find that imam objectionable?
Because they want to appoint people who will tell them what they want to hear. And again, it's on Muslims to elect their own representatives, it's on Muslims to manage their own affairs, and it's on the government to make sure that the representatives of every single community are actually elected by the communities themselves, not the other way around.
Nathalie Goulet?
No, I want to come back to the first part of your speech, which is exactly showing the reason for why just criminalization will not work. It's exactly for the social reason that you point out. Now, regarding the imam or the chaplain, it's a very, very serious issue. And we are now starting a new information committee, like investigation committee in the Senate, on Islam in France, to try to understand much better the community, the needs, not to create any law, any project, any bill, but just to have a better understanding, to be able to build together this Muslim community of France.
Do you feel that French politicians don't understand Islam in France?
Of course, we don't know it. How do you want, you want to have, what is the difference between Wahhabite, Salafism, Quietist or whatever? So you just repeat what you read, if you read something before, or you just repeat what somebody else told you. But at the end of the day, you are just not able to make yourself the difference. And if you are a lawmaker, the minimum that you ask from yourself is to have a better understanding and create this dialogue with the people, and instead of deciding for them.
Scott Sayer?
It strikes me that here you see the issue, or some of the issues actually, several, of the French political construct dealing with a France that is in fact much more diverse than those in power really want to recognize. So
I was going to, on that point, Eric Fassin, secularism, the whole notion of it, it's a reaction against the Catholic Church at the outset, isn't it?
Well, it has changed meaning entirely. That is, in the early 20th century, it was about the separation between church and state.
The church being the Catholic Church.
And it was the Catholic Church that is a state religion. Today, it's about Islam. And Islam is anything but a state religion. It's in fact a minority religion. And it's not anymore about the state, but it's about people. So we're told constantly how women should dress or not, how they should look like if they're going to come to the class, to go with the teachers and go outside of class, etc. So in fact, what we have today is the same word, laicité, but the opposite meaning. That is, instead of protecting individual freedoms, it's controlling people's behavior. And so, in fact, the word laicité, which is presented as this sort of eternal essence of Frenchness, or at least of the Republic, has changed its meaning so much that it's difficult to say that it's still the same thing. So I think what we should look at is the fact that the whole discussion today is about Islam and secularism. But in fact, the terrorists had very little to do with Islam. The fact is that if someone starts killing people and shout Allahu Akbar, they say it's about Islam. But how much did they know about Islam? How long had they been Muslims? So the discussion, for example, about imams, while it is important for many people in France, may not be the key to what happened with terrorists, who, for the most part, have been just watching stuff on the internet, etc. So, in fact, I think we should not start from religion, no more than start from the question of secularism, because, in fact, today, that's not what's happening.
Scott Sayar, you interviewed for the piece that you did a man, Jamel Begal, who is considered a mentor for some of these, or perhaps all of these, Paris attackers. How did he build up his ideology? Where did it come from?
What's curious is Begal's a man who's an Algerian who arrived in France in the late 1980s and subsequently became a fundamentalist Muslim and then a jihadist. What's fascinating is that what he describes as the factors that motivated him into his life choices are the same ones that we're describing today, and I think they do involve Islam, but they involve Islam insofar as Islam exists in France or in Algeria, and insofar as Islam is stigmatized in either of those places. My own theory for having studied this question a fair amount is that, in fact, regardless of whether one knows much about Islam, whether one has read the Quran or the Sunnah, there is a notion of identity ultimately that is inextricably linked to one's religion, whether one is Muslim or Christian or Jewish or anything else for that matter. I do believe that whether one is a practicing Muslim or not, certainly the sense of rejection by broader society is going to predispose someone to become violent. And it just so happens that if you are a Muslim, there is this entire current within Islam and within the culture in general that is willing to take you in. And that's Salafi jihadism, unfortunately.
Nathalie?
Yeah, I do agree with most of what you said. And for example, let's cite Nicolas Hennin, who was one of the captives of Daesh. And he said it clearly recently that the first order they gave to their wannabe followers is that stop going to the mosque. All right? Don't go there, because their Islam is not the real Islam. And the process is that they want to reinvent Islam so that I can actually channel their thinking into so it can fit their ideology. But coming to what Scott was saying, if let's say a child is about 5 years old, 4, he grows up constantly hearing Muslims are not French. You are not French. He goes to school. There is a permanent discrimination he faces. in schools, and then at the adult age, discrimination at work, discrimination in housing. And I'm not explaining anything whatsoever or justifying it. I'm just saying the mechanisms behind it. So when this new laïcité, as redefined by the way by François Baroin, when he says a laïcité of discipline, a laïcité of struggle, a laïcité of combat, you have a laïcité now that's actually trying to discipline people into fitting a specific agenda. So then look at the reaction from the government. So these kids grow up, they are not French. When the government instates the state of emergency, they first target Muslims, and when the government implements new measures, they, as Eric said on my right, is that we want to make sure that actually these terrorists, they are not French. But if a person grows up in France, commits a terrorist attack in France, it's a French problem, not a foreign problem. So again, we have a constant empty debate and actually an empty shell to deal with much grave issues.
All right, but we're hearing, for instance, Yasser Louati, from a French sociologist by the name of Olivier Roy, that he points to the fact that there was a survey done last year, something like 80% of the jihadists have no religious, grow up in households where there's no religion. Yeah. And they also grow up oftentimes in households where there isn't much talk either about religion or about the origins of where those people come from. In the case of Algerians, of older generations who may have fought for Algeria's war of independence, but never talk about it with the younger generations. Can the same be said that in France, it's a stigma talking about the past when it comes to not just religion, but also its relationship with its former North African colonies?
I mean, in France, the Algerian war and colonization is still a taboo. I mean, like the debates are still heated, and people are still trying to advance their own versions. But coming back to what you said, actually, when people do know their religion, they don't get caught by Daesh, because they know how to deconstruct their rhetoric. And that's why they always try to keep people away from the community and away from mosques and away from teaching circles. And I'm pretty sure Mrs. Goulet here can tell you the same.
I just want to add something to bring some water to your will, but it's because we have between 13 and 50% of people who are just convert from Christian into Muslim to go to fight with Daesh, which means that it's not only a problem with Muslim, it's just the behavior. And it's not in the mosque that you find the people who are radicalized. Exactly. It's exactly like in jail. The people who are on the verge of radicalization, you don't find them with a chaplain and you don't find them in the prayers.
All right, so that aspect, those that are radicalized, of course, that is the ultimate step. But there's a much bigger portion, Yasser Louati was talking about a minute ago, of people who just plain and simple feel alienated in France, Scott Sayar.
I think that's right. France has a very particular version of integration and a very particular history, notably with its North African colonies and its West African colonies, that has made integration somewhat halting and complicated. Furthermore, there's a notion of what the French nation is or is supposed to be that has been sort of mythologized and that complicates matters even further. I'm remembering because we're here to commemorate the march of last year. I'm remembering the newspaper headlines that immediately followed the march, and in fact some that preceded the march, which proclaimed a nation united. And it strikes me that it's easy to criticize the press, but there is a tendency within French political culture to believe that the simple invocation of unity, the simple invocation of some image of the country is enough to make it so. And the reality is that France is a nation with problems, with problems of integration, with problems of notions of belonging to the system, and that won't be solved precisely, and that won't be solved by telling people that in fact they're part of a great project.
And in fairness to the government, there really was an attempt after last year's attacks to have this conversation about, again, this concept of living together.
But at the same time, it was a conversation about them versus us. And I think people understood that from the start. And I think to go back to the question that you were asking about Islam, it seems to me that there's been a tendency to say, well, France has a problem with Islam. And therefore, if for whatever reason you have a problem with France, it's easy to identify with Islam. Whether you're a convert...
All right, how much does it have to do with Islam when those kids decided they didn't feel like marking that minute of silence after the attacks of 1 year ago?
It may or may not, but as you said before, people who are alienated will try to grab onto something. And Islam may serve as a flag for some, as a way of sort of saying, I'm on the other side. And that's why some people are converting to Islam as a way of saying, I don't quite belong. And so I think not belonging is the major issue. And so the problem is not vivre ensemble between people who are different, but the problem is that we're making some of us different.
So how do you make those people feel like they belong?
Well, perhaps by treating them the same. That is, equality is a pretty good tool if we want to have something like vivre ensemble. And I think what's happened is that, in fact, as we keep having these discussions about citizenship, who's French, who's not, etc., and about immigration, in fact, we're not talking about immigration. We're talking about people who are French and who've been French for 1, 2, 3 generations. So, in fact, it's a euphemism for race. And I think this discussion about race in France should take place, because otherwise it sounds like a Republican version of citizenship, of being French. But in fact, it's about origin. That is the opposite of what the Republic has been standing for since the Dreyfus affair.
The former French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, was in favor of racial profiling like you have in the United States to compile statistics and this sort of thing. Scott Sayard?
I hasten to note that we don't have racial profiling, at least not legal racial profiling.
But there is things like racial statistics
precisely.
in the census. There's affirmative action.
Absolutely.
No, it's forbidden.
Absolutely. But racial profiling as a police tactic, for example, is
of course,
completely forbidden by law.
Though it happens.
Though of course it happens, which is the reason why it is prohibited by law, incidentally. On this question of how to integrate race, for example, how to integrate people of different races, different colors, different creeds, it strikes me that the French model, this highly centralized, highly hierarchical model, may unfortunately be ill-adapted to the realities of the country of today. For a variety of reasons. One of the reasons has to do with the immigration into France of people with different ethnic and religious backgrounds than the French project has been accustomed to. But I think it also has to do with the transformation of Western societies more broadly, which is to say the growth of individualism, which is notably aided by technology. The French model of assimilation, which is to say the citizen is integrated into society by accepting the constraints that society imposes, is particularly ill-adapted to that sort of citizenry. Citizenry that wants its own identity to be recognized and valued, and also citizenry that has an identity that is not so normal, which is to say, from different ethnic or religious backgrounds. This all creates a terrible problem for a French system that for a long time has operated by saying you must follow the rules without asking to be recognized for your own difference. And today, people want to be recognized for that.
Nathalie Goulet, do you agree that today, perhaps, the French, the way they see their citizenship and this concept of secularism or laicité, needs to be completely reviewed?
I think that we have to...
It's too rigid?
We have to yell that the state has to apply this secularism law. The state, not the people. And right now, it's a big cocktail, because the peoples understand that the laicity applies to them, but the state has to be
neutral.
It's not the people. I mean, the peoples have their right to have their special room in cemetery. You know, if you go to Mayer, in my constituency in the middle of nowhere in Normandy, and then you are a Muslim and you ask for a special place to be buried, they say, no, it's because of laicité, it's forbidden to give you a piece of land if you die, to have your grave, which is absolutely against the law. But the people, they don't understand. So the last 10 years, we had so many laws regarding secularism, which was just, again, Muslim, that we have to bring back the principle in the middle of the speech and in the middle of the table, and we have to make it stronger and not the opposite. Laicity has to be very strong, but we have to keep it in the right frame, which is the state is a secularist.
Do you support the concept of laicité?
Of course, if the state remains neutral,
Absolutely.
that's protection for every single religion. People can believe and not believe without fearing for their own rights. But unfortunately, laicité has been redefined under the lead of Jean-Pierre Raffarin and François Baroin with this concept of new laicité, meaning that it's a laicité of combat, meaning cracking down on this rising visibility of new French citizens. And the logic behind it is that we need to keep you under check. And so as long as laicité keeps being used for political ends and advancing specific ideological agendas, then we are in deep trouble because French are born here, they grew up here, and they're here to stay. So it's on our leaders here in France to start, looking around, and as Scott said earlier, to look at France as it really is, a very diverse country with people of all faiths and all origins. But unfortunately, I'm very skeptical on the capacity of our leaders to actually bring back laicity to its original meaning.
We'll try.
Well, I will help you so, madam.
Thank you.
All right, we'll leave it there. Nathalie Goulet, I want to thank you. I want to thank Scott Sayar, Eric Fassin, Yasser Louati. Stay with us, though. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James. Emma, I got to say, at the start of the show, Nathalie Goulet buried the spirit of January the 11th of last year. What's it been like on social media?
Well, it's interesting because last week, Je suis Charlie, or Je suis toujours Charlie, I'm still Charlie, was trending very, very heavily here in France. 11 janvier, the 11th of January, not so much, it has to be said. But there are still some people talking about it. This Twitter user is choosing to remind us of those images from a year ago, that Solidarity March, incredible images that really look like something out of Les Miserables almost, and really evoke a sense of how France was this day last year. And if we take a look at this blog post from Caroline Fourest, who is a writer who herself worked at Charlie Hebdo, she does believe that the spirit of the 11th of January is alive and well. She quotes as an example the fact that there's a new survey that says 76% of people say they're still Charlie, 90% if you question more left-leaning people. She says that this is far better than had been predicted by some, and she says many had really tried to take down the idea of Je suis Charlie to sort of bring it into disrepute. But she says this really has proved that it will live on long term, although she does recognise that there are people who don't stand with her on that idea, those who whistle during moments of silence and the like. If we look elsewhere on Twitter, this Twitter user saying, where is the spirit of the 11th of January? You have to think that it's not there anymore because there was hardly anyone at the Place de la République for that ceremony. An overdose of commemoration, perhaps, she thinks. But if we look at the first reply to her, this gentleman says it's just that the French aren't going to be duped by this sort of political takeover of what's happened with regards to these events. If we look at Le Figaro,
because that's an interesting point. Last week on the 7th of January, we had our panel. We had consensus on the panel last week saying that France, in a way, is more united after the November attacks than it was back in January. Scott, you agree?
Yes.
I do. The November attacks were horrifying, as were the January attacks, but particularly horrifying in their apparent randomness. There was no ideological element to the victims, only to the attackers.
Well, this article in Le Figaro basically talks about the effect of November. And of course, last week we had another failed attack on a police station. And he says that the spirit of 11th of January is long gone. He says what people now want, and the reason that they weren't showing up in numbers at the Place de la République, is they don't want compassion from their leaders. What they want is protection.
All right, Emma James, before we let you go, Gotta say, if you're looking at what's buzzing on the media, it is, of course, the passing of David Bowie.
Absolutely, and the unanimous reaction when the news first came out, because it was announced on Facebook first of all, then on Twitter, and we've had hoaxes before, so a lot of people were saying this can't be true because we didn't know that he was suffering from cancer. His son then took to Twitter to say, very sorry and sad to say it is true, I'll be offline for a while, love to all. And he tweeted this image of him and his father from when he was very, very young indeed. Now, we've heard nothing from Iman, the supermodel wife of David Bowie, but she tweeted this the day before his death. Sometimes you will never know the true value of a moment until it becomes a memory. This image is probably the thing that everyone has seen. It was actually drawn last year to commemorate his 68th birthday, but everyone's been retweeting it today because it is a very impressive piece of art. It took her 35 hours to put together. This woman, Helen Green, does a piece of artwork every year to commemorate his birthday. This is what she did for his 69th, which of course was only on Friday. And what she says there, rather ironically, you might say, is that this was actually perhaps the most cheerful David Bowie drawing she's done so far. Elsewhere, looking around, another image that is being shared a lot is this mug shot from when he was arrested in New York back in 1976. So lots of stories about that one too. Le Figaro points out that in the first 4 hours after the announcement of his death, there were 3 million tweets. And I noticed that this morning in France, 5 of the top 10 trends were all about David Bowie, his name, his nickname, the names of his songs. And so really everyone, it seems, has so much love for this man.
Everyone's got a song. What's yours?
Oh, have to be Heroes.
All right. Many thanks, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.